Hello. So in this video we're going to talk about Joanna Laurens' play The Three Birds. So this is an adaptation of the Philomela and Procne myth, which most people who are familiar with it are probably familiar with it from Ovid's Metamorphosis. But it's also, there was also a Sophocles play about this myth. And that's what Laurens supposedly sort of takes her inspiration from. Though I'm not 100% clear on how exactly she did that because the Sophocles play is lost. There's probably some fragments of it around, but I don't know that for sure. So it's not real clear to me exactly in what sense this is an adaptation of Sophocles' version as opposed to an adaptation of the myth more generally. So, I'll start with a general sort of overview. For those of you not familiar with the Procne and Philamela myth, they're two sisters, Procne and Philamela. They are Athenian princesses, and there is their father's friend, Tereus, who is the king of Thrace. So he assists... Sorry, I'm blanking on the Athenian king's name. Pandion. Pandion is the king of Athens, Procmay and Philomela's father. So Tereus comes and he assists Pandion in battle. He helps him in a war. And so as a reward, Pandion gives Tereus his daughter Procmay to be his wife. As you do. Diplomatic marriage, all this kind of stuff. So, Procne and Tereus go back to Thrace. They spend like 5 years there, and they have a kid, Itis. Then Procne starts really missing her sister. So, she sends Tereus back to Athens to get Philomela, pick her up, and bring her to Thrace for a visit, which Tereus partially does. He goes to Athens, he gets Philomela, but on the way back, he rapes her and then cuts out her tongue so she can't tell anyone what he did, and then basically stashes her in a cave as a sex slave for the next several years. He tells Procne that she dies in some way. In Laurens' version, she gets eaten by wolves. I think in another version she drowns, or gets like attacked by brigands or something like this. There's different variations of it, but essentially she dies somehow. So Procmay in Thrace is in mourning. She's really sad. Philomela is in a cave being repeatedly raped by Tereus without a tongue. Tereus is just sort of, living his fucking terrible human being life. And while Philomela is in this cave, she weaves a tapestry that tells the story of Tereus's attack on her. And when she finally escapes from this cave, she gives this tapestry, or she has the tapestry sent to, depending on which version it is. She gives the tapestry to her sister, and that tapestry reveals what Tereus did and alerts Procne to the fact that he is a human piece of garbage. So, the two sisters decide they're going to take revenge. In some versions, including Laurens' version, they kill Procne and Tereus' son Itis. So in this version, they murder him. Procne, I think, stabs him in the chest, stomach region, while Philomela cuts his throat. In some versions, I think they don't kill him. In this version, they do. I think in some versions they kill Tereus. In this version, they don't. So there's some distinctions, different versions about who gets killed. But in Laurens' version, Itys gets killed, Tereus doesn't. Then in the myth, what happens is there's a sort of Deus ex machina kind of thing where a god comes in and changes them to birds. So Procmay and Philamela both become birds. Tereus, if he's still alive, gets changed into a bird, and that's what happens. In Laurens' version, the three of them get turned into birds, and the birds that they get turned into are symbolic of their sufferings in life. So, Laurens' version is an interesting one because she makes some important changes, and she does a lot that's stylistically interesting. So, the biggest change that Laurens gives us is that Tereus is in love with Philamela basically from the beginning of the play. So, the play opens, we've got a brief prologue by the chorus, but then the play opens basically with Tereus and Pandion celebrating this victory, and Pandion leaves to go get some stones for a gambling game that they had played as young men. And Tereus has an apostrophe. He or a soliloquy rather. He speaks to himself more or less. He says, "When she passes me, the air buffs my neck, and I hold on to its very last movings because she made them. I went to speak with her, but the jaws of her halls were uplocked tightly to a coquiliquot. I don't know how to pronounce that word. It means something like a cock-a-doodle-doo or a cockerel, like me. So I threw stones in the lake in the forest innocently. Saw black trout eyes quiet looking at the stars. She is Philamela, daughter of Pandion. Rubicon gone again, I circle her ceaselessly. It's the small things of her that catch me, the shape of her ears, the loose threads of her dress, the curve her knife leaves in the butter. Her butter curves are unique, but mostly I love the sound of her name, Philomela. I fear her name, though." And so he goes on like this for a little while. So what we get is this sense that from the beginning, Tereus is in love with Philomela, not Procne. And when Tereus and Pandion play their gambling game, and Pandion wins and decides that he's going to give his daughter to Tereus in marriage, Tereus is initially overjoyed until he learns that the daughter he's going to get is Procmay. So they go again. They go back to Tereus. No, sorry, that's not right. But Thrace. Yeah, that's right. Sorry. My mind blanked there for a second. So, I mean, that's one sort of important change. And so, when Tereus rapes Philamela on the ship and cuts out her tongue, I mean, the tongue cutting out thing is like, that's purely a response to her saying that she's going to tell everyone what he's done to her. But when he rapes her on the ship, this is a more understandable gesture, and Laurens says this in her introduction. This is a more understandable thing for a modern audience if we know that Tereus has been in love with her for years. Whereas in the original myth, he's really just an asshole king who, because he's king, can do what he wants, more or less, or thinks he can do what he wants, more or less, freely. for a modern audience, at least as Laurens puts it in the introduction, for a modern audience that isn't going to make that much sense, whereas for an ancient audience that would have made sense, because the questions about kingship and how to be a good ruler are pretty central to Greek tragedy. So Laurens gives him this additional motive, this unfulfilled love that he's had for years. Now, the thing I want to say with that, to make very clear about that, is that Laurens does not sort of use that to say, well, he was in some way justified. This is a gesture that complicates Tereus without letting him off the hook for his responsibility, for the terrible thing that he does. So that's worth noting. Another change, and not necessarily a change, but another thing that Laurens makes really kind of central is that, and this is, again, I think a thing that varies in different versions of the myth, when Procne and Philamela murder Itis, the child, they decide to cut him up and feed him to the unsuspecting Tereus. So, we've got this element here. Procne sort of comes in and she brings Tereus this bowl of food, and she's sort of acting all seductive and things like this. And he's eating his son. And this is a really interesting thing because there are a lot of Greek myths in which people are sort of tricked into eating their children. And that's always a harbinger of doom. So, I mean, the fact that Laurens has chosen to incorporate that element of the myth into this retelling is really quite significant. Again, it's a thing that we see repeatedly in Greek myth, and it's always a bad business. There's no way that being so tricked into eating your murdered child is going to be a good business, but in Greek mythology, it's especially a bad sign. Another thing that we've got here that's an interesting take on the consistent elements of Greek tragedies, we've got a lot of foreshadowing. So, in Act 1, Scene 5, when Tereus has come back to Athens to request that Philamela come with him to Thrace, Pandion says, "I don't know, Tereus, but there's something wrong about it." And then Tereus gives this sort of passionate argument about how much Procne misses her sister. He says, yes, she wants her like a cat drawn to hunt small hot things, like flowers called to reach up and not down, like the breathing out after a breathing in, the yank of earth on moon and the come-go of the tides, lick the men chutes, and that means razorfish, in their beach holes, like dropping something it falls to the floor. That's how Procne wants her. And Pandion says, admirably said, you argue the case like your own. So, I mean, first off, from both of these sections that I read, this bit here about Procne's desire, and also from Tereus's earlier speech, where he talked about how much he loves Philamela, we get the sense of Laurens' really unique writing voice. I mean, we've got sentence fragments, we've got bits and pieces of thoughts divided up, and then we've got words combined. So, like, breathing out is presented as one word, breathing in is presented as one word. And we get this throughout the play, this really unique syntax. So, I mean, and that's interesting. Probably very difficult to perform as well because it's so idiosyncratic. But the last thing I want to mention about this play, the birds issue. And Laurens mentions this in the introduction. She didn't want to have a Deus Ex Machina where a god comes in and turns them into birds. And it's not realistic. It's not a thing that a contemporary audience used to something like naturalistic theater is going to appreciate. It's weirdly handled, and I don't know that I think it works. Basically, the play ends. The chorus is there lamenting. Tereus is confronted with his guilt. He realizes the horror of what he's done. Procmay and Philamela are reunited, and they've been obviously traumatized by what Tereus has done, as well as by murdering Itis. But then the epilogue is Pandion, who's apparently come to Thrace, and basically just says, when I got here, Tereus, Procmay, and Philamela were all gone, but these 3 birds flew away. And, like, that's the end of it. Like, there's no discussion. It's not clear how they might have transitioned into those birds or what, whether those birds are just sort of symbolic and are meant to resonate with the myth, but it's not a transformation. So, I mean, it's a very sort of open-ended way of trying to deal with it, and not one that I'm necessarily persuaded by.